It's a false myth. It is not our spiritual heritage that we are evil because we disobeyed God in the garden and ate of the fruit. That's our birthright. That's the true myth. We should eat of that fruit. We're here to eat of that and remember who we are.
I am here today with Betty Kovacs. Could we start out with hearing your own experience, which you wrote about in, I believe, your first book, how you experienced your son's consciousness for an extended time after his passing?
Yes, my husband and I both did.
Okay.
And from the start, I should say that my husband was a very optimistic, loving person, but he did not focus on the kinds of things I spent my life researching and focusing on. But he was very tolerant of my interests, and I had done all kinds of things to try to figure it all out. I wanted so much to have deep experiences of the other side, so that I could say, I absolutely know. I don't believe, I know. And I had come in contact with Carl Jung very early in my life, well, when I was in college, through a Lutheran minister I dated. And so Jung had influenced me very much to pay attention to the symbolic mind. That's the right hemisphere has a language of its own. The left hemisphere has conceptual language. The right brain has symbolic language. And so I paid attention to my dreams. I wrote them down. I focused on that. I went to Peru to work with shamans. And I did begin to have experiences, for sure. But it wasn't until our son's death that I really had the kinds of experiences that I could say, I know. And my husband had those experiences too, much to his surprise. But actually, we'd had experiences even before. When I look back at my dream journals, for 2 years, I had been dreaming of his death. And of course, I was looking at it symbolically, displacing it. My consciousness wouldn't accept it. In one dream, I saw that it was my friend's son who died, but I cried and cried as if it were my own son. And I think that those dreams were allowing me to experience his death on an emotional level before the death. My husband also, 2 weeks before our son's death, he was in his office here at home. And suddenly he saw Pishti, that's our son's name, Pishti's body superimposed over his car off on the side of the freeway. He knew he was dead because he said it was superimposed, 2 different dimensions. And then he heard himself say, oh, that's right, Pishti. It's almost time for you to do this. And that shocked him so that then he heard Pishti say, that's right, Dad. I'll be out of the house for a little while. And then it was over, and my husband Ishvan did not remember it. And we happened to be here. It was unusual, the afternoon that we got the call that he'd been in an accident. He was in a trauma center in a hospital not far from us. We were both together. At that time, that experience came back, but he didn't tell me until after our son had died. So I would say that we received warnings, premonition, that it was going to happen. And very interestingly, our son, when he was not quite 12, had a dream. And he would talk about his dreams in the morning. We tried to keep that symbolic language and part of our being alive. And it was in the afternoon when he remembered it. I was vacuuming the floor, and he said, oh, Mom, I had a dream last night. So we sat down, and he told me the dream. And the dream was that he said, I dreamed I was in a hospital up above it, looking down at my dead body. It was in an operation room and then in a trauma center room. And he said, then I was in a dark space for a while. And then I was on the other side. And there was like a horseshoe. I was at the top of a horseshoe. There were 4 boys to my left on that side, 4 boys to the right. and there was an eternal fire in the center. And I saw in the 10th position an aura of a boy, and we were all waiting for him to arrive. And we knew when he arrived that I would be complete, because 10 is a number of completeness. And I'm thinking, how does he know that? you know? And then he said, Mom, what do you think it means? Well, we talked about possible meanings, and he'd be going into puberty. He'll be changing, transforming, dying to the child. But it really worried me. And then in the year of his death, he had another very profound experience exactly of how he died. And I was making cappuccino in the kitchen, and he came in, and he was going off to his college. I was going off to the college where I taught. And so I made him a coffee, and he said, oh, I had a big dream last night. And he told me about it. And I'll very briefly tell the dream, because these are the same kinds of visionary experiences in a way that we had later, except later they were more intense. He said that he was in a room, and I was in the room with him, and he would go out and come in. And then I said to him, you really are afraid? And he said, no. And he got in the bed, pulled the sheet over him, and then it just filled with light. And suddenly he shot out of his body. And he said, I was going through the universe at such a speed that planets and suns popped as I went by them. And then he said he was back in his body. And then he was in the hospital, and I was there. And he said, you said, if you want to return, you can return whole and well. But if you do not choose to return, we will let you go. And, it's the strangest thing is that when I was in the hospital with him, when we first went in, that is what I told him. He told me the dream, but he didn't mention that. And when his girlfriend and my husband and I were going through his paintings and his writing and his dreams, she said, oh, Betty, look at this. And there it was. And I thought, oh my God, that's what I said to him. Anyway, at the end, there was a huge crash. He was in the hospital. Someone was working with him, trying to save him. And then one of the doctors said to the other, let him go. He's been reduced to a vegetable permanently. And then he shot out through the universe again. And I thought, what a dream. It was almost like preparation for his death, kind of going through it before he actually did it. So it was the day after the memorial that there we were, once all of that is over in the outer world, you're left with that reality. And so we meditated that day, and we listened to music, and my husband felt his presence very, very strongly. And I also did. But there was over a period of 2 years, because my husband was also killed in another car accident 2 years later. So that during those years, we had profound experiences with him. And my husband as I said, wasn't really interested in those things. He had an experience in which he was with Pishti. It was like he was, first of all, there was like a wide circle of light, just brilliant light, like you would talk about in your experience. It was so bright, but he could see a figure in it, and it kept coming closer and closer and closer. And then he saw that it was our son in a meditative position with his head down, holding the earth. It's the image, the icon that's on the front of the book. I found that icon later in a bookstore after my husband had had that experience. It looked just like Pishti, it was just, and I couldn't believe it. How could this icon have been painted? It was exactly the image that my husband saw. Well, that particular experience lasted a very long time. They talked about so many things. And Pishti explained to his dad that they were of the same soul. And that sometimes they were born as twins, and other times they were born into this world as one. And in this lifetime, they were twins. And he said, but in parallel worlds, we are also he said, sometimes you go first and I stay. Sometimes we reverse it, depending upon the circumstances. But it was as though that people on the earth, and we so need to know, the first thing we need to know is that we don't die, that death is, yes, it's real in this dimension, but consciousness, who we are, continues. We are eternal. And our ancestors knew that we are eternal, immortal. We are also divine. We're all of the same stuff in the universe. And we are creative. So my son was explaining all that to him, and he actually experienced it. He was going down this road, and he could see all of these lives. He could see where they were one, where they were two. When they were one, he didn't say anything because Istvan, my husband, understood it. When they were two, he had to explain what was happening in both lives. And then he had this experience of love, similar to what you talk about. It was, everything changed in his life. This love was so incredibly powerful and divine. And he said, love is the key to everything. And when he came back from that vision, he was not the same man. I mean, he sat up on the side of the bed and he said, I had no idea what you were talking about, because I had never had any experience like that. I couldn't know until I had it. But I will never look at the world in the same way again. So that was the beginning of his experiences.
Wow, incredible. How did that feel for you to have your husband finally have that profound experience?
Well, so much had happened with the death of our son, the accident, and then 13 days in the trauma center, and then his death. And we were in another dimension already, I think. And so miracles were just happening, and this was a miracle, it seemed. But our son Pishti also said to him, Dad, when you were young, you had this perception, but you had to let it go. Otherwise, you and Mom might not have been able to conceive me, since they are twin souls. So he had to let that part of himself go so that our son could be born and have that. Our son was he was very much involved in that kind of thing. And then he said, now that I am not in that dimension, that part of me is you again. Does that make sense?
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, it was, yeah, but it was wonderful because when I came back from Peru before her son's death, I was trying to tell my husband about an experience I had at Machu Picchu. We meditated all day on the mountain, and then there was an ancient stone circle, and Lake Titicaca, actually it was just across the border into Bolivia. There was a Lake Titicaca in Bolivia, and then there were all of these tall structures that were actually probably containers of bodies from the time of the Incans. And so then we meditated in that stone circle. We had been meditating all day, and so that night, this just opened up with it. We saw all of these beings up on the mountain, and they had like tall headdresses, sort of like the Incas. There were children, there were people, there were animals. And I'm thinking, this is while I was still totally doubting everything. And I thought, what am I seeing? I couldn't understand it. And I saw this one dog just run down the mountain on the other side. And when we looked another way, I saw this beautiful light being that just walked off the mountain and then started coming toward our circle. At that time, I wasn't able to take it in. I looked away, which seemed so crazy to me. But I can only explain it by saying I just wasn't ready to take in that kind of energy at that point. But that was at least a beginning for me. But there were just so many things happening like that I was pleased that my husband was that he really had opened to that. And we really had all of these experiences for 2 years. And I was so grateful to have him as my anchor through all of this. So that was really a blessing.
Well, Betty, my heart goes out to you in the loss of your son. And I mean, I just can't imagine how painful that experience must have been. But I also love hearing about the mystical experiences that surrounded that for both you and your husband. So thank you for sharing.
Yes, Ellen, we continued. I had because I was university trained, I had gone to the university to try to figure it all out. But there, of course, I was pushed into the left brain, you might say. Although because of Jung, I was following my dreams, but I still hadn't been able to bring the whole mind together. So when I started having these experiences, they were so phenomenal that I knew they were true when I was in the experiences. But when I would come back, my left brain had been trained to think that it's superior. I never consciously accepted that. But that was a university teaching. Conceptual consciousness is what it's all about.
Right.
And I never wanted to accept that. But there it was. I realized I had been brainwashed on an unconscious level, because when I was out of the vision, this left brain was horrified. How could something so wonderful, so marvelous, so completely beyond the left brain's ability be real? It couldn't accept it because the left brain can't. It doesn't perceive meaning or purpose. It has to go back to the right brain and its connection to the heart. And that's the great illness of our time, is that all of the brain has been censored except the left brain, conceptual, rational, so-called scientific thinking. And so it has a bit of a sense of superiority. That's a characteristic of it when it's split off. So I had to deal with that. I wouldn't have expected that, nor anyone I worked with, because I was the one teaching these things, And then here I was caught up in that. But the fact that my husband was experiencing this and he became my anchor, which was ironic, but that's the way it worked. And so I really had so many experiences, long experiences with him, his consciousness. And one was early on. I had been in a store and I heard some music playing, and the music was so powerful. I just sat down and listened to it. And then afterwards, I went up to the person and said, "What were you playing? I want to buy it." And it was called Miracles. I thought, well, it was a miracle. And so I took it home. I went home. I was alone. My husband was out of town. And I went into his room. Just before he died, he'd painted his room white, and he had put so many of the shamanic paintings of Boulez, just beautiful shamanic paintings. So we made that our meditation room. And I put the tape at that time, put it in, and I was getting into my sweats, and the music just drew me into the room. I immediately went in the room, lay down, and he was there. And he said, "Okay, Mom, let's go through each phase of my life together." And so we did, and it was like, I felt like I was surfing on the ocean. And he said, "Just flow with life, live in the moment." And so when I would come to one experience, it was joyful, or then I would realize I didn't want to let it go. And when I wouldn't let that experience go, I started to sink in the ocean.
Oh.
And he said, live it fully, live each moment fully, then let it go. And when I let it go, then there were other experiences, and I was floating. I was surfacing, surfing, you might say, on the ocean of life, as long as I could live everything fully and let it go. And then we came to the last, when he was in the hospital and he was dying. And I stopped. I said, I can't let you go. And then I thought, but he is dead and I'm with him now. And he said, "Mom, remember Mephistopheles with Faust." Now, I don't believe my son had read that. I'd taught it, but I don't think he knew it. But at any rate, on that side, they do know. And he said, "Remember Mephistopheles?" That he tried to get Faust to hold on to the moment, hold on to him. And when he did, then it was as though when he tried to hold on to the moment, Mephistopheles had him. And he said, which is the darkness, when he tried to hold on to things. And he said, "Live each moment fully, then let it go." And what Faust had said is, when he saw that moment, he said, "Oh, this moment, thou art so beautiful." But Pishti said, "Let it go, because nothing is ever lost." So that was my first real powerful experience with him, is him teaching me to let go. Yes, in the physical world we were together, and he is dead in the physical world, but he's so much alive. And that's what he wanted us to know. He's alive, he's still creating, and that we've come into this dimension, physical dimension. We've lived many lives, and we will live more, and we are infinite. So that was a powerful lesson to really begin to know rather than believe.
That is so beautiful and such a powerful message. The message of letting go of the moment and not grabbing and holding on to things and trying to control things seems to come up over and over again throughout the spiritual traditions, especially in the Eastern tradition. And I'm not as familiar with the Western mystical traditions which you teach.
Well, they were very powerful in many cultures from the beginning of our history, from the cave cultures in the megalithic times and in old Europe, which was just discovered in the last century by a friend. I met her because of what she had discovered, Maria Gimbutas, with old Europe. And then the just absolute blossoming of this powerful spirituality in ancient Egypt.
Mhm.
And they really succeeded in allowing the mind to experience its own wholeness, the left and right brain associated with the heart, living through the heart that connects us to the universe. This was always the spiritual knowledge of these mystical traditions, is that you don't let that left brain separate itself and go flying off into the universe. It is very valuable, but only when it is married. They called it the sacred marriage with the left and right hemispheres. Then the various higher centers of the mind can be ignited, and the heart flows through the heart, which is love. The left brain alone can't experience love. It doesn't know feeling. And that's why the Egyptian civilization said, without feeling, life cannot continue to unfold. So yes, these earlier cultures were shamanic, mystic cultures, but they were censored in the West, and they had to go underground. And then we started paying attention only to the left brain, and we developed a very crippling pathology in the West, which we are now dealing with.
So you mentioned that these Western mystery traditions go back to when people were living in caves. What is your perspective on how life began here? And do you think that we've had this spiritual connection from the beginning?
Well, we know that we had it from about 40,000 BCE.
Mhm.
There are many interesting uh, theories about our beginnings, but I think that what we can know is that by 40,000 BCE, shamanism developed all around the world. That's a very interesting point, isn't it?
Yes.
So whatever happened to us earlier, from about 200,000 BCE, we have the same anatomy, the same abilities, but we don't really see it flourishing, at least with what we have, what we know historically, until 40,000. And there are some very good questions about why, but at least we know at 40,000 in the cave cultures that they had rituals of connecting to the divine, to the spirit world. And of course, the paintings in these caves are just they're so beautiful and so powerful that the story is told. We don't know whether it's true or not. That when Picasso saw the caves, I don't even know whether he saw the caves, but that when he saw those paintings, it is said that when he came out, he said, "We have created nothing. We have invented nothing in painting." That it was so the technique of painting was so powerful in those caves. And I did take a journey to France and to those caves. And when you're in them, you know that this was for shamanic purposes, to go in to have these experiences. But for so long, the scholars will know they didn't know, they thought this, they thought that. No, it's not this, not that. And finally, there were two scholars who realized, wait, let's stop everything. These are shamanic experiences that people were having in the caves. David Lewis Williams was a scholar from South Africa where he had worked with the San Bushmen and their rock art. So he saw that that's what that was. They would go into altered states of consciousness and they carved or etched their experiences in the rock. He could see the similarities, but the scholars were reluctant to accept it. But when I was in that cave, I thought, of course, this is what was going on. And now most people do accept that. The sad thing was that David Lewis Williams evidently saw what was going on, but he didn't put any value in a schematic experience. It just was their illusions. And of course, now we know better. That was the left brain talking. Of course, no, we don't know better. We need to find out how to do that. As you had prayed for so many nights to experience. That's what is our heritage, and we need to find it.
Right. And it seems to me that I guess I can only speak for myself, but I think that as a whole, we know that there's this deeper connection and we're all seeking that in some way.
Exactly. I taught mythology. I started the course at the college and in the 60s, and that was a time when, well, actually the course was in the early 70s. That's when the 60s were really getting going, you might say.
Mhm.
And it was a phenomenal time. The class was packed and students were so anxious to learn, and they were so bright and sensitive and aware, and we learned from each other. I was starting the class and starting to learn these things, and we learned a lot from each other by going back to the mythology, the symbolic stories or dreams of our ancestors, because those are their spiritual traditions. But it was just exciting time to discover that. But nothing was more important to them or to me than knowing that, trying to discover that. And by about the middle of the semester, looking at all of the patterns in various types of archaeological artifacts and in texts, it's like, boom, they would begin to see the pattern is that here we are in this state of consciousness, but we can open to this higher dimension of consciousness and know and remember who we are.
Amazing. So I've heard you speak about how this awareness has gone underground several times. And I think you said this is the first or the fifth time that
Yes.
we've had a resurgence. Could you break down for me what the other 4 times were, like what cultures those were and what happened to push them underground?
Yes. And I just want to preface it by saying that the Egyptian civilization was so powerful, and the ancient world knew that. Later came the Hebrew, the first temple, Solomon's temple, the ancient shaman mystic tradition of the Jews. Now, we did not know that until just the last century. Margaret Barker's work, an Old Testament scholar, and now that all of these texts are available to us, for so long, we just had the ones that were chosen by the particular religions. In the Christian text, it was chosen by men, meeting, deciding, because there were many, many texts in early Christianity that were very, very powerful. So with all of these texts laid out, she could see very clearly that the first temple Judaic tradition was a shaman mystic tradition. There were mystics, practicing mystics. And then, about 621 BCE, there was a group of priests called the Deuteronomists who came in and destroyed that completely destroyed that tradition and set up a tradition, which was not all bad at all. But it was more you follow the law and not the mystic tradition. So what had existed before was a powerful image of the feminine, the divine feminine, wisdom, and she was married to Yahweh. Yahweh and wisdom were partners, the sacred marriage. And of course, they honored the left hemisphere, the right hemisphere, and the heart. And there was a sacred marriage. They co-created the world together. And her images were everywhere. She was in the Solomon's temple. There is a part of it that is called the Holy of Holies, which only the high priest entered. And it was there that he joined with his bride, and she gave birth in the Holy of Holies. So you can see the symbolism of that is that we give birth to our full dimension when we have the sacred marriage. Now, when the Deuteronomists came in and destroyed the feminine, there were thousands of female images of her all over the land. And archaeologists later didn't know why were there so many female images. I didn't think that Judaism had this. But at any rate, they destroyed all of her images. The tree was her sacred image. She had these sacred groves of trees. They cut them all down, and they took her out of the Holy of Holies. She didn't exist anymore. Wisdom didn't exist. And they destroyed the wisdom literature, which is like how to achieve this knowledge ourselves. They, Yahweh and wisdom, the Queen of Heaven, of course, they want us to experience cosmic consciousness, the love that is our source. But the Deuteronomists destroyed that, and they created a world in which you follow the law. So that we didn't even know about that until the last century. Can you imagine? And then, so my point, yes, but
No, I didn't want to cut you off. I'm sorry. Before you went on to the next one, I wanted to say that that is just fascinating to me because I was raised in the Christian tradition, and we were taught that the Asherah is what we call the
yes,
female consort
she
of
is
Yahweh,
that.
that she was forbidden, like that was, and of course now it's obvious that it was just sexism and suppression of the divine feminine, but we were taught that that was evil and demonic and that it was right for them to remove all of that and that was never supposed to be part of the Jewish tradition. And so hearing the other side of that is so fascinating, that there was this thriving spiritual tradition that included both the masculine and the feminine.
Oh, yes. Yes. And to say that it was never intended to be is kind of funny, isn't it? Because it happened to have been and of course, I think they were influenced by this powerful Egyptian spirituality. I mean, they were great visionaries, the priests in Egypt, and they were in the Hebrew tradition as well. The whole Temple of Solomon is set up in a way that honors that in the Holy of Holies. And of course, with Yahweh and Asherah, or the Queen of Heaven, or wisdom. And her trees were sacred. They're a deep symbol of life, that they're rooted deep in the earth, and they grow up through the middle dimension and go into heaven, with the branches. And later we see, well, actually, no, it was earlier in the Egyptian tradition, we see many images of the tree. I was so excited when I started seeing these for the first time. And the actual trunk is the feminine body. And she is giving the fruit to people. This is the Deuteronomist told a very different story. The story before the Deuteronomist of the tree was that here it is. It is for you to eat. And it was cosmic consciousness, the knowledge of who we are. And there's an old Sumerian seal that is earlier than the Egyptian. That's why I was mixed up there for a moment, because the Sumerian before the Hebrew, I have seen seals. In fact, one of them is in my book. Here is the tree of life that Yahweh says, after he's lost wisdom, Yahweh says, you may not eat of that. It is a sin to eat of that. Well, here, 2,000 years BC, the Sumerian tree, in their spiritual tradition, the goddess is on one side, the god on the other. The serpent is up like the Kundalini. The serpent is the rising spiritual energy within us. And think how evil they made the serpent. No, that was the image of the rising from the base of the spine to the crown chakra of the spiritual energy within us. And so both she is there and he is there, and they're both holding out their hands like to the fruit that's hanging from the tree. Here it is, it's for you to eat. Deuteronomist inverted that story and made the fruit evil. That was cosmic consciousness. The kinds of experiences that you had that symbolized, no, it was not evil. It was who we are. And in Egypt, they knew that so well. So the Hebrews knew that too in their first temple, that it's offered to everyone. They're beautiful images of the tree and the feminine divine, because the feminine symbolizes the right brain and the heart, the soul. In fact, in Sufism, the heart is the soul. And she is an image of that. So there it was. They destroyed that. And it wasn't until the last century that we realized, Margaret Barker was the one who made us realize, that Jesus was a rebirth of that shaman mystic tradition in the first temple. and his teachings were mystical. But the church inverted his teachings into a false myth too, that he was God and you must believe in him to be saved. When the Nag Hammadi texts were, the church suppressed anything that didn't go along with their message. For instance, that we are divine, immortal. Anything that said that, they suppressed. So in Egypt, there were texts that were suppressed. The church was there and said, you either get rid of these or we'll come back and destroy them. Well, they didn't get rid of them. They hid them. And in 1945, we found them, the Nag Hammadi texts. And in those texts, Jesus is teaching mysticism. He is teaching love as a way of life. He is the spouse of Mary Magdalena. And he is saying, I did not come to save you. I came to remind you of who you are. It is not enough to follow the Christ. You must become the Christ. What a different teaching.
Wow, that's incredible. That comes out a little bit in the New Testament with Paul's teachings about the Christ in you.
Yes, exactly. One can get the Nag Hammadi texts and read them, but I think a very good place to start is with Meyer, Meyer, the Gnostic Gospels. And he has a wonderful introduction. And then the translations are very good. And you can read many of these texts. And it's just amazing. When I first read them, I just thought, how could we have been deceived for so long? But part of my work is showing that, yes, through the Deuteronomist, and I'm not saying they're bad people, but they destroyed our spiritual mystical legacy through Judaism. And then the church went even further in taking this terrible story, an inversion of the tree, and saying, if you eat of it, you have sinned and all your children bear that sin and so on, that the church just made it worse and worse and darker. So I heard you say in your video that you were brought up to hate yourself. This is the story. It's a false myth. It is not our spiritual heritage that we are evil because we disobeyed God in the garden and ate of the fruit. That's our birthright. That's the true myth. We should eat of that fruit. We're here to eat of that and remember who we are. And yet we were told that. And I know when I was a kid, my parents weren't Christian. They were not anything in that way, but they were loving, and perhaps this is true. It was my brother and I went to church. And I remember, we had the Bible and we knew every book, and we would even have tests of who could find it faster, in Bible school and things like. But I kept thinking, why would God say, don't eat of that? It's like, wouldn't he want us to know? But it just seemed strange to me. But it wasn't until later that I had that I could find a way to figure out what in the world went wrong there.
So you mentioned the Deuteronomists and how they came in and changed everything. Did they have any influence over the putting together of the Old Testament? Because throughout the Old Testament, there's so many passages condemning the Asherah, like the Asherah sacred trees and the Asherah poles, and God supposedly commanding people to wipe all of that out.
Yes, of course they did. And the Deuteronomists have some good writings. But yes, of course, they had the canon for the Jewish people was put together later. But of course, yes. And I'm writing an article right now, and it just, let's look at Yahweh after he abandoned the feminine. Who is he? He's a tyrant.
Yeah.
And he betrays his own people. He leads them into war. He has a favorite group of people, but he's also jealous, vengeful. This is what it's exactly left brain behavior. So what we're seeing is that in the first temple, they were including the left and right hemispheres in the heart. Once that's wiped out, then we become a tyrant. Yahweh becomes the left brain. It's competitive, jealous, manipulative. No, Yahweh is not God after he's abandoned the soul. I wonder, why did it take us so long? But of course, those scriptures were censored. And it wasn't until the last century that we had a lot of these things available to us. And to censor the Deuteronomists censored, the church censored so intensely. And then later, the church, what so many of us did not know, is that the church censored science. Because, yes, I should have, all this is preface to these rebirth periods.
Mhm.
And so here was all of this back, but we didn't know it. And so around 1000, imagine that the church took over in the 4th century, late 300s. And so it wasn't until about 1000 AD that there was this tremendous rebirth, which we call the Middle Ages, high Middle Ages. But oh my goodness, something incredible happened. Now, I'm not sure that it could have happened. I don't think it could have happened without the Islamic tradition, because Islam was moving all the way in the south of Europe and over to the west and over to the west and the east. There was a brilliant, beautiful culture in Spain, in Cordova, where Muslims and Jews and Christians worked together. They actually looked at the text together. They were philosophers. That's the way it should be. We should be involved in these major spiritual traditions and work together. And Europe then would go into Cordova to sit at the feet of these masters. But also there was a time in which it was just, I think, inside us. We couldn't take it anymore. We had to have more. And the dreams and the visions were coming. And so there was a huge awakening in the High Middle Ages around 1000. And who is the major symbol? The feminine. I mean, it is the female goddess and person. And there's so many stories of the Grail legends in which the men are always they're always making horrible mistakes. And they don't know how to deal with the feminine at all because they've been totally patriarchal. And I love one story, if I can just take a quick time to tell the story.
Yeah.
Okay, is that I think it's Galahad, or Gawain, I don't remember the knight's name, but the knight marries the most beautiful woman. Everyone is just in awe of her. She's like bright light and beauty and love. And it's just such a celebration. Well, when they go into the room at night on the first night of their marriage, suddenly she becomes the ugliest hag you can imagine. I mean, her teeth are all crooked, missing. She has warts on her face, and she's just ugly. Anything you can imagine as the ugliest, that's who she is. He's rather taken aback, you might say. And she said to him, I can be this at night, or I can be this at court. I can be the beautiful woman at night for you, or I could be the beautiful woman at court. Which do you choose? And these stories are always doing that. They're making the man think and choose. And he rises to the test and he said, "Oh, my beloved, the choice is yours." And now she is released from the curse of patriarchy to be her beautiful self, both with him and at court.
Wow.
Isn't that a beautiful story?
Yes.
And all the way, of course, the Grail legend was the great legend of the time. All of these knights of the Round Table were rushing off into the woods to find the feminine part. They're all looking for soul, for heart. And that's what it's all about. Everything that has been suppressed by the Deuteronomists and the church comes up in these awakenings. And there are so many mystics during that time, female and male, and they realize that the heart is absolutely within the heart of the cosmos, and that whatever we do to live in love and be in the heart and transform ourselves, that we're transforming the world. Every act that we perform is an act for the world because our heart is inside the heart of the world, of the universe. It was just a miraculous time. And then after that, 100 and maybe 60, I don't remember exactly, years later, the Italian Renaissance. Well, historians always say the Renaissance. There's only one Renaissance, the Italian. Well, it awakened to the world around for sure. and went beyond the church in many ways. But there were those who saw these underground traditions. Well, that's what I should have said. In the High Middle Ages, all of the underground traditions. The Judaism had an underground tradition, which was Kabbalah. And the ancient Egyptian and the pre-Socratic philosophers, who were also mystics, they were all working in alchemy. And so there were those two traditions. And then, of course, there was Sufism had come into Europe through the Crusades. So all of these underground traditions, they emerged during that High Middle Ages because that was a time for them. People could hear them. They would pay attention to them. So the same thing happened in the Italian. And Pico della Mirandola was the scholar that it can't even imagine. He could read something once and he knew the whole text. I wish I could do that. I have to go back 2 or 3 times and study it. Or he could quote it backwards. Can you imagine? He could. But he also really, in his 20s, he understood that all of these underground traditions and Christianity were at the core the same because it was about love and transformation through love. And so he wrote about Kabbalah, and he saw that it was the same as Christianity, so it became Christian Kabbalah. And, he was young, so he didn't understand the way of things with the church. He even went to Rome. He wrote, I think, 900 theses about this. He invited these great spiritual beings from all over Europe to come to Rome. They would come together and talk and reveal this. Well, wouldn't that have been wonderful? That's the way it should have been. He understood that. He could have brought them together, like Cordova again. He went to Rome to have it printed. No, this was not going to happen. The Pope saw what he was doing, and no, it would not be printed, and no, the conference would not be held. And in fact, Pico, will go to prison. And so, well, he got out. Well, one of the Medicis got him out, but it couldn't develop. This underground tradition couldn't really develop in the Italian Renaissance, but it kind of went underground, and then it came back up with the scientists and mystics, because mysticism is always scientific, because if we have a mystical experience, we like to understand it with the left brain, right? So we become scientists in that sense. So that then arose in 1600. So it was in the 1400s into the 1500s of the Italian Renaissance. And so then in 1600, they arose in Prague because the Catholic leader there was interested in those things and allowed it to take place. So here we had a real flowering of these underground traditions and science. And during the time of the Italian Renaissance, I should say that Pico was finally understood in England. So this 1600 was a Renaissance all the way from London into Prague, back and forth. And Heidelberg was a center in Germany. So that was amazing. Well, the church found out about that and destroyed it utterly. We didn't even know that it existed until the last century. We did not know that. So the last century was a fifth awakening. The fourth was in Germany. I should say that before I come to the fifth, because Germany was very much involved in the 1600 Renaissance. And so here was the church then in 1660 censoring scientists when the Royal Society for the Advancement of Science took place. The church and the whole atmosphere would not allow science to study anything but matter. Can you imagine that? No mysticism, because the mystics were the heretics. They moved, if you were a mystic, you couldn't be a good Christian because you don't go inward. And I still know people today who say that if I have a visionary experience, that's a devil. That is such a horrible thing. But at any rate, so here's science developing only matter. And then we had to have several centuries of being taught that there's nothing but matter. Of course not, because they never developed anything to study matter. It was a left brain science. Now with quantum physics in the 20th century, again, the 20th century, now we have to go into other dimensions of reality. And then there was the French philosophers, the so-called Enlightenment. It was all that was left of the Enlightenment that took place in Prague and was smashed and destroyed, manuscript, everything destroyed, everything they could. And so now the French philosophers are talking about only the left brain. We don't need any of that other stuff. The right brain, all of this, they didn't even know about the heart. The only thing that's important is the left brain. And there is Western culture based on a censored science and censored so-called Enlightenment, because the real Enlightenment was suppressed. Germany, so still in the in the mysticism of the 1600 Enlightenment, resisted. Absolutely. The Romantic period is a resistance to that, but that failed too. And they didn't have to have the church destroy it because science was saying that's nonsense. Or you really think there's something else, that's how we grew up with. And now in the fifth, with quantum physics, we have a science worthy of what we're trying to understand. Yes, there are other dimensions. And so all of these underground traditions became known in the 20th century. But I have to add that we are also faced with all of the darkness of the ignorance that has been caused by the censorship. So we have left brain people who now want to control the world, to merge us with the machine, to transhumanize us, and to create a totalitarian world government. And they are ill because that's the myth we gave them, a false myth. And now we're discovering our true myth. So that's where we are in the fifth Renaissance.
Betty, thank you so much for sharing that. As I'm listening to you, I feel like I'm gaining a whole new perspective, because being raised, as you probably were also, in the idea that a very materialistic framework for the world, we can get the idea that this is just the way it's always been. This is
Exactly.
but in fact, the human story has been all about this knowledge of the truth of who we are, that we're reaching for that, and we have that within us, and it keeps coming up to the surface, and they keep suppressing it, but it keeps coming back up.
It's exactly true. And many indigenous cultures knew that. But the West you put your finger right on it, is that we sort of grew up thinking, oh, now we're really aware and now we know what life is like. I mean, there's nothing but matter. And so there'd been nothing else. Everything else was such nonsense and primitive. And, we reduced it. And if you didn't believe that there's nothing but matter, you couldn't be in the university, really, if you let people know that. I mean, so yes, it's like, this is the real world, the one that there's nothing, there's no meaning, no purpose. We're a fluke of nature. When you're dead, you're dead. What a hell of a thing.
Right.
I didn't even know that was going to come out. Trying to live with, it's just the most damaging, the most false worldview that we could possibly have. And we've destroyed so many of our children with that worldview. A serial killer, I think, in Michigan, remember the young man who said he killed so many people? And he said, well, the earth is dead. I mean, he didn't know. So many people are so in need of knowing this truth and knowing that they can experience it, that it is our heritage, and that this has been a result of censorship by those in power, and that we need to be very aware of censorship today. What is being censored today? But we need to know this is our heritage from the beginning of who we are. The spiritual dimension of reality is our heritage. We are born out of it. We are it. And we are here to learn how to be great creators. We are learning the lesson that you can't create well if you censor.
Yes, definitely learning that right now. So, Betty, what is your perspective on how we can help this awakening along so that we can keep from being suppressed again, and so that maybe this time we could awaken the entire world?
Oh, yes. I've thought a lot about that, and I had a vision in which I was to work on that which is decayed. That is the hexagram from the I Ching. My husband found it in Pishti. He said, read that hexagram. This is the work. This is your work. And it is the work of the earth. And I think that the decayed is what we have allowed to happen because of the censorship, that we have allowed all of that aspect of us to decay. It's become some pretty bad things. And I think that, yes, it is our work to work on that which is decayed, to know the darkness. And then how do we heal that darkness? And certainly this is a left brain schizophrenic illness. So the left brain can't heal it alone. As Einstein said, you can't heal a problem with the same kind of thinking that constructed the problem. This is left brain stuff. The left brain is very valuable. It's a part of who we are, but not when it's severed. So we know this darkness. Now we must open ourselves and learn how to love and honor and respect the symbolic world that is part of our brain, the right brain, the dreams, the visions, symbolic stories, fairy tales, literature that's symbolic. But I think we have to go within and begin that process of allowing our left brain to turn to the right, to allow the right brain to teach us how we solve this problem. The right brain is connected with the heart, and the heart opens us to the universe of love and wisdom. I think we have to work to get to know that right brain, that loving heart, the ethical principles of the heart. We've cut ourselves off from the ethical, loving principles. If we start nurturing visionary dream experiences, studying that, like your experience, you don't have to believe, you know that the light is the most powerful, because light is love, is consciousness. And to seek that in ourselves, because it is in us that we experience it. We open to that. That's our birthright. That's our source. That's who we all are. We're all totally united. And I think it is that process of going inward. And, we think in the West, oh, that's so hard. I don't know how to do that. That's okay. We have to learn. If it's baby steps, as you would say, baby steps toward learning how to do this with the right brain. To be aware of symbols. What are the symbols in our world? What about the Christmas tree? What is that symbol? The tree with the lights circling all around to the major light at the top? What's that symbolic of? I think we just have to learn gradually how to be a partner with the right brain, which is connected to the ethical and loving principles of the heart. And we can believe, if we have to in the beginning, if we can get any kind of indication, we can simply believe that love is the key to everything. And then we will take ourselves to the point where we know it because we're experiencing it like you did. You know it. And once we know that, we know the power of it. Love is the most powerful frequency in the universe. I know that there are millions of people, billions, on the planet who love. And they are raising that energy on the planet to connect with light coming into the planet. Do I have time to tell one more vision?
Yes, please do. Yes.
Okay. This was such a powerful one, and there were others similar, but this one, it was so real. I was in my period of doubting when I had it before the deaths. And I would always say about this one, there's no way. I cannot doubt this. I could not have made this up. But two women friends, and I did a meditation. And during the meditation, I had probably the most powerful experience of my life, because I saw this vast light disc coming in through the glass doors. Now, my eyes were closed, but it was coming in through the glass doors. It hovered over my head. And I felt this love, this consciousness. I knew that it was light. I knew that was whole. The round was whole. It was light. It was conscious. And it was far too powerful for me to take in. And as I realized that, then a female figure swirled out of the bottom of it and into my crown chakra, into my heart. And she had on a white satin square hat, which would make it a mandala, the round circle square hat, and a white satin dress to her waist. And when she was in me, then she began to sing. And it was the most, like what you experienced, the most beautiful, powerful love that permeates that is the universe. And she's saying, we are here to be with you all three. Can you feel us? Because it was something we had to feel. Well, I did, and they did, even though they didn't see it. And it said, you have called us and we are here. Your planet has called us and we are here. And then I knew a lot of things, like you said, and whatever question you have, the answer is there. I knew a lot of things all at once. I knew that light, she said that we are the light that circles round your planet. And I knew that light had been there for a very long time. And she was communicating to me that the longing on the earth the longing and the love on the earth are now so intense. We've reached a tipping point, and that light that has been around our planet for eons can now connect to the planet. And each of us is an anchor in that love, that we're anchoring it in the planet, and we become lighthouses with that light going around the planet. And this, I knew that we'd been waiting for, we can be healed of this darkness because we have called light and love to help us and anchor that in the earth. My husband had a similar vision of something similar to that. And other people have had that too. As a matter of fact, in Sri Aurobindo's ashram around the 50s, they were experiencing a love and a light that was coming. I was so shocked when I read this after I'd had this experience, a love and a light that was coming and connecting to the planet, that we are getting this from all of those beings who love us and want us to learn these lessons of light and love. And I also, and others have had visions of people being born onto the earth to help us. And they're a little bit more advanced in their development, but they are being born to help us. And that the merchants of light are this light around the planet connecting, and that it intensifies the energy field. So the earth now has a more intensified energy field so that higher developed beings can be born into it. And we can be more highly developed and more successful in our work with the light and love. So that's when I get so down with the darkness, I think, no, remember that. Remember the light and the love. That's more powerful than anything. And it's every individual's heritage. We are all a part of that. No one is left out.
Betty, thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. Would you like to share with the viewers where they can find you and about your books and your website and anything else that you have going on?
Yes, the website is kamlak.com, KAML, that's ML Merchants of Light, KAMLAK.com. And I have videos, a lot of videos and interviews, websites, webinars, and articles. And if someone would like to buy the book, they can buy it from Kamlak. And if they want to join the newsletter, they will get a chapter from Merchants of Light. And there's a French filmmaker who's going to be making a film of Merchants of Light, Anthony Chen, Chene. So it'll come out, I hope, by the end of the year. I don't know, but that has a lot of explaining of what I've tried to do with these earlier cultures and the Renaissance period, so that we know this is ancient. This is our very being from the beginning. It's not some new age thing alone.
Yes. So I will have all of those links in the description if anyone would like to go check out Betty's work. Betty, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and comment with your thoughts and opinions, and check the description box for the links to my free community where I share lots of resources, my Pay What You Can community where we do classes and challenges together, my TikTok, Instagram, my Clips channel, and lovecoveredlife.com where I share my paintings. Thank you so much for your support.